In August 2002, two 10-year-old girls headed out to purchase sweets from a nearby sports centre and failed to come home. The extensive investigation into their disappearance, which made headlines all across the United Kingdom, led the police to the door of a high school caretaker named Ian Huntley. Unlike many of the killers we cover, his subsequent arrest didn't come as a shock. Huntley had a violent reputation and had numerous brushes with the law, many of which pertained to the abuse of young girls. Shortly after his arrest, Huntley was tried and convicted of the murders of Jessica Chapman and Holly Wells. But questions still remained. Just who was Ian Huntley, and what led him to take the lives of two innocent children? In this documentary, we aim to shed light on these questions and more, as we explore the Soham Murders, the disturbing case of Ian Huntley. The Disappearance. Jessica Chapman called her best friend Holly Wells on the morning of August 4th, 2002, and arranged to come and see her. She left her home on Brook Street in Soham, Cambridgeshire, at around 11:45 a.m. to visit Holly and gift her a necklace she'd purchased while on holiday with her family in Menorca. The necklace was described as a pendant with the letter H in a circle, decorated with two dolphins. The walk to Holly's residence in Red House Gardens was brief, and upon arrival, the two 10-year-olds played computer games with another friend, Natalie Parr, who went home around lunchtime. After eating, Holly and Jessica continued to spend time on the computer. At 3:15 p.m, they changed into Manchester United shirts. One belonged to Holly herself, while Jessica wore the one belonging to Holly's older brother Oliver. Holly's mother Nicola took a photo of the girls in their identical shirts. This image would later become infamous. It was the last photograph taken of the pair before they went missing, and was widely circulated following their disappearance. Holly's family were having a barbecue that day, and the girls spent time mingling with members of the Wells family while eating dinner. At around 6:15, Holly and Jessica finished up. Holly's parents remembered the two girls going upstairs and heard them in Holly's bedroom through the floorboards. This was the last time that either set of parents saw the girls alive. Unbeknownst to them, the girls headed out to a local sports centre to get snacks from a vending machine. They didn't tell anyone that they were leaving, and the prosecution would later reflect that the girls, no doubt, felt secure and confident in an area with which they were entirely familiar. They lived there, they went to school there, they would have no doubt that they were surrounded by faces they knew. At 8 p.m, Nicola Wells entered her daughter's room as some of the guests were leaving, as she knew the girls would want to say goodbye. But the children were not there. Nicola and Holly's father Kevin searched the house, the garden and the street, as well as adjacent streets, but failed to turn up any trace of the two 10-year-olds. Alarmed, they contacted Jessica's parents, who were also concerned that their daughter hadn't come home, especially because Jessica's mobile phone appeared to be switched off, and they were unable to get hold of her. By this point, it was around 8:30 p.m, the girls' curfew. The parents attempted to locate their children alone, calling neighbours, friends and relatives, but found nothing. Holly and Jessica were reported missing at 9:55 p.m. The investigation. The girls were seen together by several witnesses and were also located on CCTV, which showed them doubling back on themselves numerous times after leaving Holly's home. Witnesses recalled them by their football tops, both of which had the name Beckham on the back. They were seen walking up Sand Street and across the River Lode, as well as at the sports centre on the Soham Village College site. They were spotted walking on College Road at 6:32 p.m, their arms linked. Over 400 officers were assigned full-time to search for the 10-year-olds, conducting house-to-house inquiries across the town. They were assisted in physical searches for the children by hundreds of local volunteers, as well as US Air Force personnel from nearby air bases. The photograph of them taken just over an hour before their disappearance wearing their red football tops was released, along with descriptions of each girl. Both sets of parents made it clear that Holly and Jessica were not known to speak to strangers. The head teacher of the school they attended, St. Andrew's Primary School, echoed similar sentiments, telling the media, "The possible danger from stranger is something we have impressed upon the children from an early age." Every registered sex offender in Cambridgeshire and nearby Lincolnshire was interviewed, and a further 260 more from across the UK were also questioned. Authorities feared that the 2 girls had been kidnapped, but all of the investigated sex offenders were eventually ruled out. It was briefly theorised that the children had met up with someone they'd met in an online chat, but this too was soon dismissed. Over the next few days, a clip of CCTV footage showing the 2 girls walking together was released to the public in an attempt to jog memories and bring forth further witnesses. Furthermore, a reconstruction of their last known movements was recorded and broadcast on August 10th, 6 days after they were last seen. Both Holly's and Jessica's parents appeared on ITV's Current Affairs show Tonight, where they were interviewed about the disappearances. Family members appealed to the media, asking for the safe return of the girls, which subsequently generated over 2,000 tips from the public. On August 13th, newspapers began reporting that the police had suggested that the disappearance of Holly and Jessica was related to the abduction of a 6-year-old girl. The unidentified child was taken from her home in Barton under Needwood, a village in East Staffordshire about 2 hours from Soham. The theory that the 2 cases were linked came because a dark-coloured Ford Mondeo with false plates was tentatively linked to both incidents. It's believed to have been the vehicle of the perpetrator who snatched the 6-year-old girl, and a similar-looking vehicle was spotted in the Cambridgeshire village of Glatton, not far from Soham, near the time that Jessica and Holly went missing. Investigators stated, a few days before Holly and Jessica vanished, the car we believe was used to abduct the Barton girl, with its false plates, was seen in Glatton in North Cambridgeshire. However, we have said we do not know where this man is from. We have carried out a psychological and geographical profile, and there's a possibility he came very prepared for the abduction and is now operating in a large area. Thankfully, the 6-year-old was discovered 30 minutes after she was taken and was physically unharmed. Her abduction was also linked to that of an incident in the same village the previous year, where a 12-year-old girl was followed by a driver of a dark-coloured Ford Mondeo. Detectives noted that the Mondeo had number plates which had been stolen from another vehicle in Nottinghamshire. Though authorities made 2 national TV appeals, launched a poster campaign, checked out reported sightings and created an e-fit of the suspect, no answers as to the identity of the man were found. On August 7th, a taxi driver reported seeing the driver of a 4-door dark green saloon car struggling with 2 girls in the back on the day of the disappearance. The driver of the saloon car was described as thrashing his arms while he drove south on the A142. The taxi driver followed the car for several minutes until it turned off into the Studlands Park estate in Newmarket. No further leads came from this sighting, however. Ian Huntley, the witness. The most notable witness in this investigation was 28-year-old high school caretaker Ian Huntley. He told investigators one day after the disappearance of Holly and Jessica that he had a brief conversation with the 2 on his doorstep shortly before they went missing. He described how the girls had asked after his fiancée, Maxine Carr, who was the girls' teaching assistant, after they'd spotted him brushing his dog just outside the front door of the home he shared with Carr. Huntley said the girls were happy as Larry when he spoke to them, but voiced regret that he had not asked them where they were going. The girls reportedly inquired as to whether or not Carr had been successful after she applied to be a full-time teaching assistant at their school. Huntley told them that she had not. They then replied, "Tell her we're sorry," before walking along College Street. When interviewed on August 15th by a Sky News correspondent, Huntley gave a similar account. "I don't know the girls. I was stood on the front doorstep grooming my dog down. She'd run away and come back a bit of a mess. They just came across and asked how Maxine was, and I just said she wasn't very good, as she hadn't got the job, and they just said, 'Please tell her that we're very sorry,' and off they walked, in the direction of the library over there. He added that everybody around here, and I've been speaking to a lot of people, and that their saying is, while there is no news, there is that glimmer of hope, and that's basically what we're all hanging on to. Over the next several weeks, Huntley inserted himself into the investigation numerous times by giving lengthy, detailed interviews to police and reporters. In one particular interview, he discussed in depth how the girls might have reacted to a stranger. Journalists such as Brian Farmer, who interviewed both Carr and Huntley, recalled finding the 28-year-old's responses suspicious. When Farmer asked Carr about stranger danger, he noted that Huntley, who by all accounts didn't know the girls well, jumped in to respond. Farmer recalled, he said he thought Holly would probably get in the car and quietly go, but Jessica wouldn't. She'd put up a real fight and a real struggle. He observed that Huntley seemed agitated during the interview and was surprisingly emotional. Reflecting on this particular interview in 2022, Farmer stated, "I think the way he described how Holly and Jessica would react is exactly how they did react. He knew how they'd react because that's how they reacted when he killed them." Huntley also volunteered Carr to be photographed with a farewell card she'd been given by her students after her contract for her classroom assistant job had not been renewed. Holly had signed the card. However, Huntley was adamant that he would not be photographed. Farmer noted, "Methinks the reason people don't want to be photographed generally is because if their picture is published, someone will recognize them." Though he didn't find Maxine Carr to be suspicious, he added, "I did think, well, if he's not telling the truth, she's not telling the truth either." Police found Huntley's involvement with the case to be odd, and about a week after the girls disappeared, journalists raised their concerns with investigators. As well as hanging around the police and reporters, Huntley would ask questions about the state of the investigation, and even inquired about DNA samples. One officer noted that he had 3 scratches on his jaw, about 1.2 inches in length, which Huntley claimed had been inflicted by his dog. On another occasion, as per the Telegraph, Huntley asked a DCI how the girl's abductor would pick up a police message left on Jessica's mobile phone if the battery had been thrown away. Additionally, on 2 different days, Huntley reported false information to investigators. The first time he claimed that a red Ford Fiesta, notably the same make and model as his own car, had been driving suspiciously in Soham shortly before the girls went missing. The second time, he reported seeing a man carrying a black bin bag and generally acting suspicious near the Soham Village College buildings. Prosecutors later stated that the report was total invention and again shows a devious and calculating mind, which was well able to think about what he needed to do to distract attention from himself. On August 5th, the day after the girls went missing, a single police officer was ordered to search Huntley's home. But nothing of note was found, although the officer did find the home to be suspicious. They observed that his clothing was hanging out to dry, but it was raining. They also noted that the house was extraordinarily tidy and there was a strong scent of cleaning products in the air. Huntley simply said, "Excuse the dining room, we had a flood." Colleagues of Huntley's would later report visiting the couple and finding Carr scrubbing the kitchen tiles so extensively that the paint on the tiles was coming off. More suspicious still was the fact that just 24 hours after the disappearance, Huntley began extensively cleaning his car, a small red Ford Fiesta. The vehicle, described as being purchased in 2001 and 11 years old, was by all accounts in great condition and had been driven just 38,700 miles. The tyres on the vehicle were replaced following Jessica and Holly's vanishing, and the mechanic noted being surprised that they'd been asked to replace them, since the existing tyres were still in good condition. After having them replaced, Huntley paid the mechanic £10 to record his car's license plate incorrectly. Investigators would later discover that the car's interior carpet in the boot had been replaced by roughly cut house carpet. On the morning of August 6th, Huntley drove to Grimsby to collect Maxine from her mother's home. A neighbour of Shirley Capp, Carr's mother, saw the two standing beside the car. The neighbour stated the car boot was open and both of them appeared to be looking into it. Maxine was sobbing and Ian just looked really thin and pale. When Huntley noticed the neighbour was watching, he closed the trunk. Further investigation. The remains of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman were discovered on August 17th, almost 2 weeks after they went missing. At 12:30 that afternoon, a gamekeeper discovered the bodies of the girls, unclothed, lying side by side in a 5-foot ditch near the perimeter fence of RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk, over 10 miles east of Soham. Notably, the gamekeeper recalled an unusual and unpleasant scent in the air when he was in the area several days earlier. He had returned with friends on the 17th to investigate the cause of the foul odour. Upon seeing the bodies, the men immediately contacted the police. The remains of Holly and Jessica were in an advanced state of decomposition, as they were partially skeletonized. A cause of death could not be determined, but coroner David Morris stated his belief during the inquest that the most likely cause of death was asphyxiation. He added that the girls had not been killed there in the wooded area, but had been dumped there within 34 hours of their deaths. Chillingly, it was observed that the killer had attempted to set fire to both bodies in an attempt to remove any DNA or other forensic evidence. Notably, just 1 day earlier, on August 16th, Huntley and Carr had been questioned by police for the first time. They were interviewed for about 7 hours, and they each claimed to have seen the girls before they went missing. Carr by this time was parroting much of the same things her fiancé was. She corroborated Huntley's story that he had spoken with Holly and Jessica just before they vanished, claiming that she was bathing at the time. She stated, "I only wish we had asked them where they were going. If only we knew then what we know now. Then we could have stopped them or done something about it." Around this time, Huntley's physical appearance had changed. He'd lost weight and showed symptoms of insomnia. His apparent distress led to him being prescribed antidepressants. Investigators later reported that Maxine Carr lied repeatedly while in contact with police. While in the presence of an officer conducting house-to-house inquiries before the pair were formally questioned, she argued with her fiancé about what he was wearing on the night of the girls' vanishing, stating, "I should know, I do the bloody washing." The prosecution would later observe, here she was entering into the spirit of things, inventing not only an incident, but giving it the feeling of truth by arguing about the colour of top he was wearing. We suggest that in that behaviour, Carr was hardly a reluctant liar. The couple also pretended that Carr was in Soham that night, despite the fact that she was out of town visiting her mother. After being interviewed formally by police, Carr and Huntley were placed in a safe house in the village of Histon so that they could be kept under supervision. Shortly afterwards, an extensive search of the couple's shared house at 5 College Close and the grounds of Soham Village College, where Huntley worked as a caretaker, was carried out. Again, the house was immaculate, though it was later noted that the search revealed several items of major importance to the inquiry. Items recovered from the school grounds, meanwhile, consisted of the girls' charred and cut football tops, which were located inside a bin on the property. Fibres discovered on the tops were matched to Huntley's body and clothing, and from fabric inside his home. Furthermore, his prints were recovered from the bin where the items were disposed of. That same day, Huntley's vehicle was forensically examined. Despite his best cleaning efforts, experts found chalk, brick dust and concrete inside the car, which was matched with that used to pave the road leading to where the bodies were found. Adding further suspicion was the fact that a cover from the rear seat was missing, and as mentioned earlier, the carpet in the trunk had been replaced. Forensic ecologist Professor Patricia Wiltshire also played a key role in gathering forensic evidence against Huntley. She determined that pollen found on the shoes and inside his car matched that which was found at the scene where the bodies were found. She also located the approach path where Huntley went back and forth from the ditch where the bodies were dumped, noting that trampled nettles there made an obvious path. She recalled, the plants helped because Huntley had put the girls' clothing into a bin and tried to burn them back at the school, and lo and behold, it was covered in little bits of vegetation from where the girls had been laid. She added that she had eliminated numerous other sites from the investigation, noting that the eliminated sites did not carry the same pollen and vegetation. She also observed there were many marks in terms of pollen grains and spores on Huntley's shoes and his vehicle that firmly put him in that place, not just once but twice, because he'd been back to check on things. The arrest. Carr and Huntley were arrested on suspicion of abducting and murdering at 4:30 a.m. on August 17th, shortly before the bodies were found, but after the disposed of clothing had been discovered, along with numerous other pieces of evidence. During questioning, Huntley appeared evasive, emotionally detached, and even at times confused. He reportedly even drooled on numerous occasions, which police felt was an attempt to feign mental illness. Officers were subsequently forced to have Huntley speak with professionals at a mental hospital and undergo psychological evaluation. Carr, however, buckled quickly under the weight of interrogation. She admitted that she had not been in Soham on the evening of the girls' disappearance, and thus could not back up her fiancé's claims that he had spoken with the girls shortly before their disappearance, or that what he said was the truth. She claimed that it was her idea to act as Huntley's alibi, and stated that Huntley had told her to tell the truth during the earlier police interview, but that she'd lied to protect him from his past. She claimed that a false accusation of rape had been made against Huntley in 1998, and that it had triggered a mental health breakdown in him. When asked if she had done this to protect him, she added, "He hasn't done anything wrong and whatever. I mean, I know you've gone through loads of stuff earlier on the interview, but I will stay at the same position that to me he's done nothing wrong. I love him, and this is just all wrong." It was also revealed during this round of questioning that Huntley had phoned Carr while she was still at her mother's, and he'd stated, "The thing is, Maxine, they came in our house." He told her that they'd come inside because Holly had a nosebleed, and that he'd helped her stop the flow of bleeding while Jessica sat on the couple's bed. Afterwards, both girls left the property unharmed. However, Huntley then told Carr that he'd been falsely accused of rape in 1998, and that his previous arrest had caused him to suffer from a breakdown. He was worried that he was going to be accused again of something he didn't do. This led Carr to suggest that she could be his alibi. When she was informed, however, of the numerous items of evidence proving his guilt in the murders, including the discovery of the bodies and the recovery of his fingerprints from the bin where their clothing was found, Carr reportedly burst into tears and yelled, "No, he can't have been. He hasn't done it." Despite these revelations, Carr continued to defend Huntley, with reports describing her as emotionally attached to him. She was subsequently charged with attempting to pervert the course of justice, and in January 2003 was also charged with 2 counts of assisting an offender. While on remand at Holloway Prison, she asked often about how he was doing and wrote him letters in which she continued to express her love for him. She finally severed contact with him 4 months later, in December 2002. Ian Huntley the killer. Ian Kevin Huntley was born on January 31st, 1974 in Grimsby to a working-class 18-year-old couple named Kevin and Linda Huntley, who married after finding out Linda was pregnant with their first child. Ian's father worked as an apprentice gas fitter, while his mother received a pittance for her job in a printing works. With very little money between them, they struggled to make ends meet. Linda had to give up her job to become a stay-at-home mother, leading Kevin to take extra shifts to cover the costs of having a newborn baby. But the couple weren't completely alone. They were able to live with Linda's parents initially, which allowed them to save money every month. They eventually moved into a rental property on Pelham's Road in Imington, several miles north of Grimsby. But it wasn't long before the couple conceived again. Huntley's brother Wayne was born on August 16, 1975. In his book, Beyond Evil, Inside the Twisted Mind of Ian Huntley, Nathan Yates describes Huntley's father as an overworked man whose exhaustion led to him being a strict and glum father, with friends recalling him as an unsmiling individual, dark and pinched, with a stern aspect, mature for his age. Despite being an uncompromising disciplinarian, Kevin was said to be devoted to his wife, something he had in common with his firstborn, who became jealous of his younger brother's arrival. Friends of the family recalled Huntley being a handful as a baby, bursting into tears at a moment's notice, adding he was always screaming and crying and wanting his mum. He seemed to do it a lot when she was bothering with the younger one, as if he couldn't stand her giving attention to Wayne. Yates wrote in his book that the jealousy of his younger brother was a driving force in Huntley's life with his ex-wife, whom he was married to briefly in the 90s, stating that his envy scarred his entire life. By all accounts, Huntley grew up as a mummy's boy, having a distant and disconnected relationship with his father. In school, he was relentlessly bullied and seen as a loner. Huntley's long forehead earned him the names Spadehead and the White Cliffs of Dover from his classmates. Due to his asthma and frail body, he struggled to hit back at his peers and would often report bullies to teachers, making the target on his back even bigger. And it wasn't that he was just a tattletale. A former pupil at his school recalled, everyone hated him. He caused so much trouble making stories up about people who didn't like him, and that turned out to be pretty much everyone. The teachers didn't like him much either. That said, one primary school teacher remembered him fondly as a dear little boy. At some point during his early childhood, Huntley reported being beaten and sexually abused by an adult, describing it as something which scarred him for life. Few details are available about the incident. At the age of 11, Huntley moved to a different school where he was just as unpopular among his peers. He kept the same old habits, telling on other students and making up stories, and eventually his bullying became so bad that he was moved to a different school. Huntley's academic performance was less than average, and he likely suffered due to the bullying he endured. At his new school, he still struggled to make friends. He tried joining the Scouts, but disliked the physical activity. He then joined the Air Training Corps when he was 13 and started harbouring ambitions to join the RAF. He became familiar with the Lakenheath Air Base, where he liked to go to look at the planes from a distance. This was the same location where he would later dump his victims. But Huntley left the cadets after about a year, and bitterly disappointed by his failures to establish himself in school or his chosen activities, and reportedly nursing an insatiable need for attention, he attempted suicide by taking an entire box of paracetamol while he was home alone. He was found by his mother, barely conscious, and taken to the hospital, where his stomach was pumped. Huntley would attempt to take his life several more times, but his peers saw it as nothing more than a desperate plea for attention. From a young age, Huntley also had a desire for sexual activity and was seen as a predator by his classmates. He had his first girlfriend when he was 12 and bragged about losing his virginity at 14. One classmate recalled, his technique with girls was to pick on the youngest, most easily conned ones he could find and basically just lie to them. He'd tell them anything just to get in with them. I can remember at least 3 girls he went out with at school. They were all younger than him, and none of them lasted very long. As a teenager, Huntley didn't get any better. He began torturing animals, walking the streets in search of cats or dogs he could abuse. A former schoolmate stated, the things he did were really sick. He used to strap bangers to dogs and cats and blow them up, or pour paraffin over them and set them on fire. He was always boasting about it, as if everyone would think it was great. Around this time, he met a girlfriend, Amanda Marshall, who found him to be flirtatious, and noted that he had that confidence with girls. By the time she turned 16, the couple moved into a flat together, though their relationship began to disintegrate. The Scotsman reported that she relied on him for her self-esteem, so his need to control her grew. He began telling her what she could and couldn't wear, and who she could and couldn't talk to. He bore all the hallmarks of an average abuser, obsessed with putting his domineering desires into play. On one occasion, Huntley struck her on the head with a pool cue, knocking her unconscious. Amanda eventually left when she discovered that her partner had been bringing home children, most of whom were around the ages of 12 and 13 when she wasn't there. But after Huntley attempted to kill himself, she returned. She subsequently went to a psychiatrist with Huntley and became pregnant with his child, but the child would never be born. Huntley threw Amanda down a set of stairs, and she suffered a miscarriage afterwards. She finally left him for good after this act of violence. Huntley left school at the age of 16, having managed to pull off 5 GCSE passes. He subsequently took up work gutting fish in Grimsby, but like with school, he struggled to fit in. He subsequently worked several menial jobs, suffered bouts of unemployment, and struggled to find a stable place to live. As an adult, Huntley was described as being manipulative and insecure, his distinct lack of confidence leading him to prey on vulnerable women and girls. By the time of his 2002 arrest, Huntley had already been investigated by police and social services in connection with 9 sex offences, including 4 alleged rapes, 4 allegations of raping a minor, and the indecent assault of an 11-year-old girl. Additionally, he was noted to have been in at least 2 controlling and physically abusive relationships with so-called girlfriends, both of whom were minors at ages 15 and 16. On one occasion, he locked a 16-year-old in a room because she refused to have sex with him. He subsequently kept her locked up for 2 weeks before finally releasing her, at which point she had been hospitalized for starvation and dehydration. In 1994, aged 21, Huntley began dating Claire Evans, an 18-year-old he'd met while working at a local Heinz factory. The couple were together for 2 months before becoming engaged, and they tied the knot in January 1995. Just days after their union, though, the cracks began to show, as Huntley revealed himself as a bad-tempered and violent man. Within a month, he began to regularly sexually assault Claire and would abuse her frequently in other ways, including locking her out of the house and cutting off her hair. In another incident, Claire recalled her husband strangling her over the kitchen sink. Recalling, "I could see him grinning and laughing as he did it. I could hardly speak and was gasping for breath, but the more I tried to struggle, the more he seemed to enjoy it." Like Amanda, she fell pregnant with his child, but was physically abused so badly that she suffered a miscarriage. When Claire finally left him, Huntley would claim that she slept with his brother on their wedding night, and that is why they were divorcing. After they split, Claire did begin to date his brother, Wayne, and they eventually married after Huntley finally signed off on their divorce. Wayne and Claire are, however, divorced at the time of writing this documentary. Following his split from Claire, Huntley continued to see minors. Police believe that before his arrest, he had had at least 30 sexual partners, but many of those girls could not consent as they were children. Many of those who fell for his charms became shocked when they learned of his violent temper. In August 1995, the police were called when the father of a 15-year-old girl accused Huntley of sleeping with his daughter. Both police and social services investigated the case, discovering through the girl herself that indeed there had been a so-called sexual relationship. However, the 15-year-old declined to press charges, so the case was dropped. Though Huntley should have been arrested for unlawful sexual intercourse, he wasn't. If he had been, the police would have been quicker in pinpointing him as a solid suspect in the case of Holly and Jessica years later, and could have prevented it happening in the first place. Later in 1995, Huntley admitted to burglarizing a neighbour with his 16-year-old flatmate, but as police had not made proper notes at the time, the confession was ruled inadmissible in court. The victim of the burglary followed through with pressing charges, despite, she says, attempts at dissuasion by the police, but the case was eventually stayed, the charges left on file. During this time, Huntley continued to pursue young schoolgirls. One girl's mother came to the door to warn him off, while men, armed with baseball bats, came on behalf of another with a similar message. In 1996, he met 15-year-old Katie Weber, who developed a crush on Huntley. The pair began a so-called relationship, and she moved in with him shortly after meeting. As he always did, Huntley instructed her to cut off family and friends, and told her she'd need to leave school and get a job. A friend of the young girl's observed, he treated her like a slave and spoke to her in this domineering, obnoxious way. He really messed her up. She was a really bright girl, but he forced her to leave school and get a dead-end job. Reflecting on her time with Huntley, Katie recalled being frightened of not doing what he wanted. She added, "Once it was clear I liked him and we'd had sex, he began to treat me like a child to bully me." Over the course of their relationship, Katie was violently abused, and after one particularly bad fight in 1998, while pregnant, she fled and contacted her father from a phone box, hiding until he was able to pick her up. Katie gave birth to Huntley's only child that same year. In April 1998, Huntley was arrested on suspicion of raping an 18-year-old. He claimed that the act had been consensual and was not charged. Another 18-year-old came forward and alleged that she had been raped by Huntley in May while walking home from a night out. CCTV footage of the two from a local nightclub showed them interacting, but this was deemed insufficient evidence to bring charges. Though he was not convicted of anything, word began to spread about Huntley's reputation as a rapist and child predator. He was often insulted by his neighbours and ultimately lost his job and was forced to move in with his mother. Furthermore, he was prohibited from interacting with his daughter or her mother. A month later in June, a 12-year-old girl told the police that she had been sexually assaulted by Huntley in September of 1997. He had persuaded her to go for a walk before sexually assaulting her in an orchard. She managed to escape Huntley briefly, but he caught up with her and threatened to kill her if she told anyone about what had happened. Though this allegation was investigated, Huntley was never charged in connection with the incident. Because his name had been in the papers 2 months earlier concerning an alleged rape, the 12-year-old girl's claim was not deemed to be credible, much to the fury of her mother. The Chief Constable of Humberside Police in 2003, David Westwood, claimed that system failings and human error were to blame as to why Huntley had not been noted as a suspect in Holly and Jessica's case, and why such a blatant sexual predator was allowed to go without facing punishment for so long. He claimed that records had been deleted under the Data Protection Act, but several experts have disagreed with this statement. Westwood eventually walked out of an interview when pressed further about why Huntley had been a free man for so long. Westwood was suspended for ordering the destruction of records involving alleged child molesters whose cases were not convicted, but this suspension was later overturned. Notably, the head teacher who hired Huntley for his position as a secondary caretaker also came under scrutiny when he admitted that he didn't check any of his references before offering him the job, nor did he check if he was a suitable candidate to be working with children. The aftermath. Huntley was eventually cleared for trial, where he entered a not guilty plea to 2 counts of murder. He claimed while on the stand that Holly had drowned when he accidentally knocked her into his bath, and that he smothered Jessica to stop her screaming. The Home Office pathologist noted that this idea was wholly implausible, and that it was unlikely at the least that Holly could have drowned in the bath from a fall. He added that Jessica could only have been smothered to death through forced restraint against vigorous struggling. Huntley would later tell his father that he had killed Jessica to prevent her from calling for help on her mobile phone. Huntley, who was 30 by the time the trial was underway, told the jury, "I wish I could turn back the clock. I wish I could do things differently. I just wish none of this ever happened. I'm sorry for what's happened. I'm ashamed of what I did. I accept I'm responsible for the deaths of Holly and Jessica, but there's nothing I can do about it now. I sincerely wish there was." He claimed he carried on like nothing happened, because he was frightened and ashamed of what he'd done. The judge, meanwhile, described him as showing persistent cruelty and merciless cynicism towards Jessica, Holly, and their families. Between the burnt corpses, the cut-up clothes, the items being disposed of at his workplace, the fingerprints and the pollen traces, there was too much physical evidence against Huntley for anyone to think that what he'd done was a simple, tragic accident. Prosecutors believed that the killings were sexually motivated, a conclusion they reached after learning about his status as an alleged serial rapist and child predator, and the fact that he washed his bedsheets just after the girls' deaths. Interestingly, Carr told investigators that it was her job, as Huntley had put it, to do the chores, so it was most unusual that he'd taken it upon himself to wash the bedding. The murders are largely considered a crime of opportunity, with a criminal psychologist labelling Huntley as a latent, predatory paedophile who lured the children to his home simply because the chance presented itself. After 17 hours and 32 minutes of debating, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Huntley was subsequently issued with 2 life sentences. He will not be considered for release until 2042 at the earliest, by which time he will be 68 years old, and we can be thankful this appeal will almost certainly be rejected. Maxine Carr, meanwhile, was charged with 2 counts of assisting an offender and 1 count of perverting the course of justice. She pleaded guilty to the latter charge, but fought the 2 counts of assisting. She claimed that she had only lied to authorities so that she could protect her partner, whom she believed was innocent. She was found not guilty of both counts of assisting an offender and was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison for perverting the course of justice. She served 21 months of her total sentence and was released on probation on May 14, 2004. She was subsequently given a new identity and moved into a safe house. It has been reported that in 2011, Carr gave birth to a son, and in 2014 she married. She lives in a seaside town with both. Her husband is said to be fully aware of her true name and her connection with the case. The couple's property at 5 College Close was demolished just 2 years after the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. During his time behind bars at HMP Franklin at Durham, Huntley has been attacked by fellow inmates, has had numerous health issues, and has attempted to take his life on more than one occasion. He has come to blows with the likes of Peter Sutcliffe, spree killer Mark Hobson, and armed robber Damien Folkes. He is also known to have confessed to the sexual assault of the 11-year-old girl in the orchard in 1997, whose testimony was deemed not credible when she eventually came forward to the police. The victim of this crime felt a massive sense of relief after word of his confession reached her, but added, "Yet I still feel upset that Huntley was left at large, resulting in the deaths of 2 innocent children." Fellow inmates have described how Huntley is a loner who doesn't get involved in group activities. In the same way, he was a loner in school and work. In November 2019, he was placed in solitary confinement for kicking a guard and swearing at an official. While his kick was labelled pathetic, he reportedly cried as he was placed in isolation. At this time, his special privileges were revoked. He lost his £20 a week painting job and was prohibited from purchasing fish and chip dinners. The deaths of Holly and Jessica shook the UK and the world at large. The girls would have been in their 30s at the time of this video. They would have had jobs, maybe married, travelled, had their own houses, and maybe even children of their own. But this was brutally taken away from them by a cowardice, depraved monster who will spend the rest of his life behind bars.